All right, hello, and welcome to another installment of Chocolate Chat, brought to you by the Persistent Rumor. My name is Chocolate Yoda, spelled Yoddah, because film studios are litigious. And today I am thrilled to have with me author, entertainer, chef, and all-around brilliant dude, Seth. See, I always just know you as Seth, but the whole thing is Seth David Branitz, and
That's it.
I knew you as Seth Davis. Hey, so before you get into all the good stuff, do you remember where you were on the night of July 1st, 1999?
July 1st, 1999, 2001. No, tell me.
All right. See, now I remember because I was on a first date with a young lady named Janine.
Oh, yeah.
And she had picked the spot called The Cup in Wanto, New York.
Oh, wow.
And I walk in, and much to my surprise and amazement and delight, there you are, sitting on a stool with your guitar, serenading the crowd, and I got to be a big shot and be like, hey, I know that dude.
Well, you do not.
Right? But then I proved it afterwards by walking up to you and saying hello.
Right.
So, yeah, so that, so that young lady and I got married. We got divorced. And 21 years later, she's still one of my best friends in life. So look at that. So you were there for that.
Not only was I there, I was responsible, partly responsible.
Partly responsible. Yeah. And I remember where I was in 2005 when I got this.
Oh man. Where were you?
Oh, I don't know. I was in Valley Stream somewhere.
Oh yeah! Wow, cool.
But yeah. Still hot on my playlist. So.
Awesome.
So now you've written this book. There's something about Mary, about how horrible the Farrelly brothers are. No, just kidding. It's it's called The Trouble with Kim. So take it away, Seth. Tell us what you want to tell us about the book, about your life, about the restaurant, anything you want, man.
Oh
it's it's a free flowing conversation.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you about the book. I started writing. I started writing about some people in my life and some personal stories about 6 years ago. But prior to that, and for the 20 years and more prior to that, I wrote mostly songs. I always wanted to write a book, and I always wanted to write screenplays. Then I would start them and write movies and things. But songs were nice and tidy and little bites and easy and easy to hide behind too, because there's prettiness and there's form and there's rhythm and sometimes there's a band, and you also don't have to say exactly what's on your mind with a song too, because you can just repeat yourself a lot, and you can hide behind metaphor and imagery. But I started to write these stories, and I posted a couple on social media, and then from that I got invited to come and read aloud at a book festival, writers festival.
Oh, yes, I saw that video on Facebook. Yeah.
And then from there, I got interested in doing what I was a big fan of the Moth Radio Hour, and I started going to the Moth in the city and performing at different Moths and winning these events, so what that did was it just made me realize that these things in my life that I'd thought about since then were worthwhile, worth talking about, even like some of the painful ones or ugly ones, some of the difficult ones, the absurd ones, the impossible ones. And I got into, and it was an interesting process because I was writing these stories and seeing things in them that I had never seen before. Because when we're experiencing life, we're just kind of experiencing it, and we might say, oh, that was hard, or that was a bummer, or that was ridiculous, but then the phone rings and we move on to the next moment in our lives. But now I got to really sit with them and say, well, wow, that was nuts.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I got to ask people about them, and I got to fact check some of the things from my life, um, and in that way, writing about some of these events. I got to tell you something in a second. These incidents in my life was harder than the first time, because I
Interesting. Yeah.
really spent time with it. I remember this one time that I was in the room with you, and somebody said something about incidences that had happened. And you said, let's hold on a second. You said, they're incidents. There's
Yeah,
an
yeah,
S at the end. That makes them
yeah,
plural. It's not incidences.
yeah. Yeah. See now, and the funny thing is that I stole that from somebody. I stole that from my
Oh,
buddy Wayne, and I used that moment to make myself look smart. So,
you did look smart and pissed.
but
and
mostly I
I
used that
and
moment to convince everybody about how obnoxious I am.
the word incidents, when it comes up in my life, throughout the year, I think of
Yeah,
you. I always think of that.
yeah. That's
Not as
funny.
obnoxious, but as
Right, right,
a
right.
teacher in that case.
Yeah, and
So
I do find Wayne obnoxious, but that's a whole nother story.
I'm
No, I
sure he
love that
is.
guy. Anyway,
I'm sure he is.
so you something that you said. There's two things that you said that I find interesting. Okay, so the idea of revisiting and fact checking your memories, essentially. So how did that go? Did you find that there was a difference between your recollection and other people's recollections?
In some cases, I mean, the main players, aside from myself in these stories, are no longer living. Several of them, but I was able to check like calendar dates, and then I check with some people, and yeah, a lot of it was very, very different. There's one story about this guy who was in the neighborhood, who was among a group of other boys, and we went, and they were all older than me, and they were scary to me. They were really into war, and this one guy, Cedric, was part of that crew, and we all went into the woods to, like, break things and burn things and drink or whatever. And this one particular day, they the main guy decided that it would be a good idea for them to tie me to a tree, and they did. They
Oh,
tied me to a tree, and I was trying to be like, all right, guys. And then they got newspaper, and twigs, and they stuffed them all around my legs and up my pant legs, and then they set me on fire. And then I'm okay. I didn't get harmed by this, and
whoa.
then he said, and then the main guy, who everybody seemed to follow, said, "Gentlemen, pull out," just like in Apocalypse Now or something. And they all started to walk away. And this one dude, Cedric, he's like, guys, and he said, fucking assholes. And he came over and he stomped him out. And I was choking, and he untied me, and we walked out of the woods together. That's how I
Wow.
remember it. I got in touch with him recently as I was getting ready to publish the book, to thank him for standing up
Right.
to their stupidity. And he wrote back, he said, well, I like your version better than mine. That was actually my idea.
Oh, wow. Wow, wow. That's
and
intense.
it was intense and interesting. And so I included that in the story. I added that on to the end of the story. And most of the going back and looking at these things just sort of increased, intensified pain, or brought up pain they'd never even had before.
Right.
Because again, there's things that happen, but now just hanging out in the pain, hanging out in the offense, in the trespass, hanging out in the, you know, in the incident was a lot different, than
Yeah.
I wasn't insulated by before and after anymore. I was just really being there on the page. And then
Right.
even things as simple as writing it and make sure I'm spelling right and spacing and punctuating right. I'm still there,
Right.
way more than I was for the 3 minutes that this thing happened,
Right. Right.
40 years ago or
That's
whatever.
extremely valuable. And the group of people that we were around when I made the correction about incidents, that was something that I found extremely valuable is not only the idea of delving into your history and the incidents that took place, but also having the opportunity to spend time with them and see them from a different perspective. And also sometimes realize that your impression of the incident was just wrong,
Right.
or the conclusion that you drew as a result of the incident, because it's like Shakespeare said through Hamlet, there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so, right? And a lot of times you get to the end of something and in the moment you're like, oh, that was terrible or that was great or whatever. And then in retrospect, you have a completely different view. And then of course, you're talking about things that in some cases happened decades ago, and now you're a completely different person. And so you're looking at that with fresh eyes and all that other stuff. So I find it to be a very valuable exercise
Yeah,
to
I
do
haven't even
those
thought
things.
about that. I hadn't even thought about it in those terms, that this was like this was after doing a few years of that work that you're talking about, where we were, but the difference is with that, it was for me and maybe one or two other people that I was going to share it with, right? But so it was who, what, where, when, and know, how, or why. In this case, it was a whole lot of how and why and what the
Yeah.
fuck and all that. And of course,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tried to make it readable, for someone else, or
Right.
tellable for a story for an audience, because I thought, because that was the main thing, is I was telling it for audiences. The idea of the book came along when I started collecting them, and I realized, wow, that would be really cool. But it
Yeah.
was like pulling teeth to get it to happen. It took a number of years, and I'm so glad
Yeah. Yeah.
that part of it is over.
Yeah, I imagine so. And, from the review that you posted on Facebook, something else occurred to me. And this is the second thing that I find interesting. And it reminds me, this is going to sound like a hard left turn, but it reminds me of something the creator of the show, Everybody Loves Raymond, said. In an interview, he had said, I wrote this show about my family, my life, very specific people, very specific incidents. And I was shocked to learn how many people relate to these things, right? And the review speaks to that. Like here's someone that's talking about your life, yet it relates so powerfully in their own life. And, again, something that I learned back in 1988 through all that work we did is that once you know yourself, you essentially know everyone, because really we're all alike in some ways. Like there's what we are and there's who we are, which is something that I talk about a lot, especially in coaching. And who we are is the personality, the outward presentation of ourselves. And those obviously have tremendous variety and variation, right? But what we are is fairly consistent. That's why you can write stories that are so specific and so personal to you, and yet have people relate to them, because, we all tend to have these experiences, these thoughts, these feelings. And, it's always great when someone, I think, I think the reason that people love to read and people love to listen to music and watch television and watch film is that we only get to live one life, which is our own. But then we get to relate to other people's lives, and in some cases, vicariously live through them through, songs and TV shows and films and books and that kind of thing. So I find that to be a very, very interesting thing about humans.
Yeah. Yeah, people want to relate. People want to know they're not alone, I
Yeah.
suppose, especially when it is something so lonely as shame or abuse or whatever, or mental illness. And so, what is interesting is that I always thought, that my story, from growing up is such a it's not that unusual, but I don't run into people who grew up like me, Jewish, but not really Jewish and not religious, ashamed of being Jewish and in an integrated
Yeah.
neighborhood, poor, and then running into the troubles I ran into and with my brother, you but uh, but people don't relate to that, but they'll relate to one little piece of it, and usually it's the feelings. It's usually that
Right.
they drove different cars and looked different and all that kind of stuff, but they had some sort of their own isolation, their own shame was felt similar,
Right.
and that is what makes us the same. It's not that we had the same last name or went to the same church or whatever. It's because
Right.
it's just that we experienced, we suffered similarly.
Right. And that to me is the fascinating thing about being human, because roughly speaking, in the entirety of the planet and in the 300,000 years that we've been a species, there have been roughly 150 billion human beings that have crossed planet Earth, and none of them, literally none of them, had the same life. Right? There's no standard life. There's no prescribed life. No matter how much people want to preach that this is the way to do things. You go, you go to school, you get a job, you get married, you retire, you have children, blah, blah, all that, all that prescribed societal stuff, as if
Right.
we're all just cookie cutter people, and we're not. Yet, even though no two lives match up in terms of experience, in terms of emotion, there's a tremendous amount of crossover. Because being human does have some universal truths to it, and really it all comes down to how we solve the problems of being human. Because our brains are wired for very simple things. Basically, find stuff to eat, find someone to fuck so that you can make more people, and run away from stuff that's trying to eat and fuck you. Right? And, so how do you go about solving those issues? How do you go about dealing with the knowledge that you're going to die one day? I mean, that's the persistent rumor that we're all going to die one day, right? So how do you deal with that? And so people come up with things like invisible friends in the sky, and that are very meaningful to them, that they're willing to kill for and die for, and some people find other ways of doing it. So it's all very interesting, and I think that even though I haven't read the book yet, I know that I'm going to, because as you as a songwriter and a creative person have a command of language. I mean, I love your songs and always have, and it's because it's the same reason I love Shakespeare. It's Shakespeare is why I fell in love with the English language. That and in the wrong hands, the English language is just horrific. We've seen that for the last 5 years, right? In the right hands, English can be just beautiful and moving and enrapturing and all these things. And you have that ability to take what is in your heart and your head and put that down and present it in a way that people relate to. And I imagine that's very gratifying.
Wow. It's very nice to hear. I know it's hard to receive too, not being like a real school guy, not being a Shakespeare guy myself, and not, I just kind of, I think that the way I write and the way I talk is really just the way I talk. It's just conversational, that's what I
Mm-hmm.
try to be. As far as songs go, yeah, I had the benefit of a little bit of help from music and a nice voice and some rhythm and stuff. But that's so nice of you to say. I'm glad.
Oh,
I'm glad
it's
that.
my pleasure. Hey,
And I
listen,
love language
I've
too. I
gotten to
love listening to
consume,
people.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I realized in the middle of me saying whatever I was about to say that it was probably only going to serve to deflect. So I decided to not do that. You know,
Right. I thought I heard you say you love language too,
I love
right?
language. I love listening to people. I love listening to stories. But some of the best storytellers they're not necessarily eloquent. They're not necessarily using like amazing vocabulary. Um, but their heart is there, you know,
Yeah.
and there's something about like you could just fucking feel them, you know,
Yeah.
and that I think it says a whole lot more than uh, where some other storytellers maybe who I don't get as much, or maybe I do, we're educated or what they read, you know,
Yeah.
and they're not mutually exclusive. You ever hear interviews with Mario Puzo?
No, I have not. Of course, I'm a lover of his work.
Yeah, you listen to this guy, and he really sounds like he could be, you know, you like he's selling you the roast across the, you know, the provolone across the county. You know, when he's and the same thing with Mickey Spillane, you know, who
Mm,
wrote a little just rough around the edges guys, and I enjoy that, and it's an entire I enjoy it as much as reading their words,
mm,
but I enjoy it more because it's adorable and it's
yeah.
novel, and yet they changed the world, or you know, fortified the world with their written word, you know,
Yeah.
and I don't know what that means, but it's
No,
cool.
but you know, you bring up something that I think about quite often, which is this idea of education. Because when I'm assuming that you're using it in the way that it's normally contextualized, which is school, right? Like you've gotten a college degree, you're educated, but that's not all education is. You know, if we're paying attention to life, we're all very well educated. And storytellers are very educated people because they take in life and then they represent it outwardly, and people go, oh wow, that's interesting, or that's true, or oh my god, that I feel that. You know, like my favorite storyteller is a guy I know from my personal life, and I met him in my business life, and we wound up being friends, which is extremely unusual in my experience. And he's this Irish guy, about I think he's about 15 years older than me or so, and he just can go on and on and on for hours. There are times I've gone out with him on his boat. You know, we'll go out for 3 hours, and he basically doesn't stop talking the whole time, and I don't stop laughing the whole time because
Mm-hmm.
he's such a brilliant storyteller. You know, so you know, education. So a college degree. What does that got to do with anything? Like, okay, you went to college, you got a degree, congratulations, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything in terms of your ability to communicate. You know, a lot of people that are lawmakers in Congress and Senate went to college, and they act like they've never met a human in their whole life. You know, so I don't put any inherent value in a school education. What I put inherent value in is people who can communicate to me in a way that resonates with me. You know, and that's why I love singers like Billy Joel. He's my favorite artist. And why? It's all about words and the combination of those words and what they make you feel. So,
Yeah,
you know, forget about all that humility about, oh, I don't have a college degree. Fuck that nonsense. You know, you're a
yeah.
communicator, you know, and that comes through in everything that you do.
Thanks for saying that. I
My
hope so.
pleasure. My pleasure. So one thing I want to note, you know, I've known you since roughly the fall of 1987, and you know, most people age like fruit, and you have aged like a fine wine. It's kind of disgusting, but it has been a pleasure to see the different iterations of your life. I've had the pleasure of eating at your restaurant. I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak the words that you've written. I've had the pleasure of hearing you sing the words that you've written and listen to the music that you've created. And you know, so obviously I have my experience of you, but what's your experience in the context of everything I just mentioned?
um,
That's an easy question, right?
yeah. Um, well, I'm so glad that I have had good work to do. because without that, um, there would be all the rest of it,
Yeah.
which has
Yeah.
been no more challenging than other people, and no more challenging than it would have been if I didn't have the privilege that I enjoy on so many levels. Um, but it has been fucking challenging, you know.
Yeah.
Life has been hard. I've lived with mentally ill parents. I've got a partner who is really challenging. I've got my own mental illness, which has even though things have gotten better and have stayed away from like daily suicidal practices like using drugs, for
Hmm.
instance,
Hmm.
I still ended up suicidal
Yeah.
several times during these past years that I've known you, and ended up on medicine, and which I'm grateful for, um, and very down on the world and down on myself, and so I've frequently credited uh, art and music, and I guess I can credit like my creative life for
Yeah.
saving my life. You know,
Yeah. That makes
like
sense.
if I didn't have songs to sing, and which is how I am able to climb out of the muck and insert some beauty. If I didn't have these stories that I just put into the book, um, then I'd be left with the realities of those stories, you know,
Yeah.
instead of the processing of it and the hashing out and the unpacking and and getting through that they've offered. And then, you know, the restaurant has been, you know, I've been cooking most of my adult life, and um, although there's moments that I hate it and I think, what the hell? Why am I doing this? Why am I chopping broccoli? Why am I counting money at the end of the day? Why am I
Right.
suffering the you know two-thirds loss of this pandemic? Um,
Mm.
all that kind of stuff. It's still fun, you know. It's fun. I'm playing with food, man.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the interesting thing about what I do, the various things that I do, is that they have the rare um, qualities of being work that is regularly and highly praised. When you play a song and you finish, people clap. When you give somebody food and they're done with it, they come over and they say, "Oh my God," you know, compliments to the chef. And
Yeah.
I don't think electricians and, you know, professors get that as
Right.
regularly as I do. So much so
Right.
that I don't even hear it anymore. You know, I mean, my filters say, "Oh, they're just saying that. What else are they going to say?" Not so much with the food,
Interesting.
but with the art
Yeah.
stuff. It's like, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
what else are they going to say? What else are they going to do? But I do know that, you know, I do have those reminders. I'm so grateful for being a creative person, and um, the you know it's a different kind of I think about the word calling. We have a calling, you know, but I mean, it really does for me call to me, you know, it calls to me all day long. When I'm doing other stuff, when I'm laying in bed, I'm thinking I should be working on that song, or I want to be sharing that story. You know, that's it calls me sometimes away from other things I'm doing. But if I do have a
Mm.
calling, it's one of the it is something more artful than the food. But I'm grateful for that. Instead of
Yeah.
resenting it and feeling like it's been away and I don't want to work, it's been a pretty spectacular way to pay the bills, you know, and I
Yeah.
am grateful for it because it's touched a lot of people. I've worked with so many cool people, and when it comes right down to it, when I'm in a good mood and my head's right, I'm playing with food, which I really like, and I'm feeding
Yeah.
people, which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It it becomes a very interesting paradox, where on the one hand you have these experiences that were painful, experiences that you've had to struggle through and sometimes still struggle with. However, it appears to me that all of those experiences inform all of the stuff that you love to do. right? So
Yeah, I think so, for
so
sure.
that it sort of becomes a chicken and egg equation, right? You know, without all those experiences, would there be all of this amazing output of art and, creativity?
Yeah.
Hard to say, right?
It's
Like
hard to say.
we
Well,
yeah,
there would be output, but it wouldn't be this creativity. It wouldn't be this stuff, right? It wouldn't be these stories, these results, these,
right.
these pictures. It wouldn't be that. Hopefully I'd be doing something. I know a lot of creative people, very creative people, and we all have different stories.
Yeah, yeah.
So who knows?
Who knows, right? But I, for one, am very glad that you've developed into the kind of creative person that you are, because you could be creative at robbing liquor stores. You could be a
Right.
creative serial killer, but instead your creativity has found a home in the written word, the sung word, and your food, which I think food is such a very significant relationship between people. The my buddy Wayne, who I had mentioned earlier, I'm actually interviewing him on Tuesday. He's won one of the Chopped champions on the Food Network show Chopped, and he's been in my life for like 32 years. My son's godfather, all that other stuff. But he's this amazing chef, much like you are, and you know the way I think of it is that when you make food for someone and feed them, you are essentially part of that person's life forever, because you've literally given them the thing that keeps them alive. I think there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And besides that, I think it's been my main uh, uh, the main projection of my activism, because I'm a vegan chef, right? I'm a vegetarian
Right.
and vegan chef. So not only that, it's like for every meal that somebody eats in my place, and most of them aren't vegetarians, they just eat there because the food's cool. And
Mm-hmm.
for every meal they eat there, somebody else didn't get hurt, and it
Right.
influences people and opens their eyes and maybe leads them to a life where they can, have a more help the world be a more compassionate
Yeah.
place with less suffering. And that's kind of cool. I worked with a chef once, and I ended up working with him, becoming friends with him. But the first time I met him, I was um, like on his crew at this big catering thing at some fancy place on Central Park West. And I walked in, and I'm helping out, and we're all working really hard getting this snooty thing ready. And he asked me, he said, "Oh, you're a musician." He's a musician. We started talking about music and stuff. And then at one point he said, "Music, cooking is kind of like jamming, isn't it?" He said, "We're all in here. We all bring what we have in. We get out of each other's way, and we're all sort of dancing around this thing in service of something beautiful. It's not
Mm.
about us. It's about the thing." And it
Right.
was so great. And I feel that way a lot when you're in the kitchen dancing. We're dancing together. We're making this cool thing happen. We might not even say something to one another. On a busy day, the person next to me reaches, I move out of the way, so that they
Mm.
could pull the thing, and we duck and we say behind you. And it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it is really kind of cool when I see it that way.
It's I just watched A Bronx Tale recently again for the first time in a few years, and Sonny said there's nothing sadder than wasted talent.
Mm-hmm.
So I am thrilled that you have not wasted your talent, that you've
Yeah.
put your talent to good use. I've
Thank you.
always
Me too.
enjoyed it, and I look forward to continuing enjoying it. I was thrilled. When you put out on Facebook, hey, do you know anybody that I can speak to about my book? And I thought, yeah, how about me?
Me. Yeah. That's exactly what I was looking for.
And that moment, as small as it sounds, was very big to me. I just think you're a wonderful person, and yes, it is wonderful to see you. I haven't seen you in so long, and even more wonderful to speak with you. But everybody, run out and get The Trouble with Kim at all the places that you get books. And I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So Seth David Branitz, thank you so much for chatting with me. And I have been saying since coincidentally around pandemic time, I even told you on Facebook, I'm like, hey, yeah, I'm planning to go to the restaurant. And it's just, everything changed right after that. But as soon as I can, and I know I could speed by and do a curb pickup, but I'm like, bullshit. I want to see him and chat with him. So once we get the all clear to do that, I'm gonna come up and do that. I'll probably drag my son up there too. But hey, man, thanks a lot. Pleasure chatting with you.
My pleasure.
And I look forward to seeing your posts on Facebook. And stay safe, stay healthy.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It was great talking to you. You're very good at this. Thank you.
Thank you.